you so much. Welcome everyone to this very special panel titled Which Way Forward? Grassroots-led conversations on the role of technology in the food system with particular reference to the Global South. I'm sorry you cannot see me, but be sure I'm here. If you can hear my voice, it means I'm really here. My name is Nimo Bassi. I'm the Director of Health of Mother Earth Foundation, an ecological think tank based in Benin City, Nigeria. I'm chairing this session, and I'm happy to announce that we have two excellent panelists who will be speaking shortly after I finish this introductory comments. Veronica Vela of the ETC group, who will be speaking to us from Mexico, and Foniso Antia of HOMEF and coordinator of Afritab, the Anglophone section, will be speaking to us from Port Harcourt, Nigeria. And so the question before us is which way forward? And we're looking at grassroots-led conversations on the role of technology in the food system, coming from the Global South perspective. New to humans. Technology is not anything exotic. What is new is the rate of change and the profusion of usage of technology. People are so immersed in technological tools that before COVID-19 brought about physical distancing, tools like mobile phones have already introduced social distancing. You have friends sitting together, family members sitting together, and each glued to their phones and none speaking to the other. It's so bad that in a sense, we have lost a sense of personal connectedness, and that is not facilitated by technology, for instance. We are so hooked on the internet, for example, that we don't even care where the energy that powers the web is generated from and from what source. The place of technology in our world today has been raised to that of more or less fetish. And many believe that technology can fix anything. Now, conversations go on at grassroots level on the role of technology on food system has kind of moved towards attempts to dig up overlooked conversations besides other issues. We ask questions like, why do people easily believe that we cannot feed the world without technological innovations, such as modern agricultural biotechnology and the newer variants of synthetic biology, extinction genetic engineering, as well as challenges for dependence on robotics in food production. We ask questions like, can technology fix pandemics? Can it fix COVID-19, for example? Can technology fix the climate crisis? Can technology create pandemics? The conversations examine, and I believe we're going to hear some of that, and for action. Really convinced personally, narratives are the building blocks upon which systems are built. Narratives can trigger patriotism, and they can also trigger rebellion. The current multiple crises that confronts the world today, that of finance, that of food, that of health, are all basically perceived, understood, and responded to through templates provided by prevalent narratives. If we accept this as being true, then it must also be true that a tool for overthrowing unacceptable systems and building preferred futures and social relations must be by decolonizing narratives and building counter narratives. And so it's my pleasure to welcome all of us to this conversation with two great wonderful conversationists. It's my pleasure to welcome all of us to the conversation to be led by to them, we'll open the space for further discussions and questions. So feel free to share your questions in writing. Person over to Veronica Villa, who's psychology and history. She's a member of the ETC group, an analysis of socioeconomic and drug alternatives. So at this point, if you're hearing me, Veronica, it's my pleasure to turn it over to you to make your presentation.
Thank you so much, Nemo.
Veronica,
yes.
if you can hear me, you have the floor to make your
Thank you. Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Nemo, and thank you everybody for being here, and thank you to the organizers of the Oxford Real Farming Conference. Nemo already mentioned that I work with the ETC group. This is an international organization based in Canada. We have offices in Mexico, in United States, in Philippines. Yeah, and I will do a small sharing of the reflections around this issue, which way forward, thinking the future after the pandemic, or even now in the middle of the pandemic. In Mexico, I participate in a network of peasant organizations called In Defense of Maize. And at a regional level, I participate in the Alianza por la Biodiversidad and the Latin American Network for Social Assessment of Technologies, which we call the Red Tecla, and with organizations from Ecuador, Costa Rica, Honduras, Colombia, Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Brazil. So the reflections I will share now come from which way forward conversations held among organizations from those countries. I will share my screen. 1 second. Yes. So you see here a lady in surprise looking at the Zoom, looking at the screen in a Zoom meeting, no? And this is a drawing from an actual meeting that we've been trying to promote meetings among indigenous organizations with all the connectivity issues that you can imagine, no? The quarantines, curfews, and emergency situations are part of a moment where capitalism is laid bare and allows us to see its mechanisms. The actual situation results from years of dismantling health systems and privatizing services that are vital for the subsistence of everybody. In many places, basic knowledge to prevent diseases was just erased from the instruction in medical schools. In Mexico, for instance, we lack toxicologists and epidemiologists, as well as intensive care specialists that were needed during the first wave of the pandemic. Now we have a little more help from Cuba, especially. And yeah, we've been dealing with the pandemic for so long that, yeah, this is being in a way addressed, no? But it's surprising to see that as a consequence of the privatization of education and the shaping of the formal instruction according to you know, the profit guidelines, we don't have these specialists or this medicine in the service of the peoples, no? In Latin America are the poor that have been dying the most. Maybe this is not news. The poor in the cities where traditional therapeutics and communitarian networks have been destroyed, where public transportation is unbearable, where most of the economically active citizens survive out of informality, selling out in the streets, cleaning buildings, packaging goods, building infrastructures. We see a crisis that stems from the vicious circle of supply and value chains in all layers, which created a perfect storm. We say in our conversations, the sky fell, the general structure fell, while the whole floor of assistance, dismantled by years of structural reforms, extremed the situation. This creates a parenthesis in which, as people die, anxiety takes hold of the population. We say the virus does not have medical expressions only. It is the combined summary of this crisis. Then we are all confined, becoming prey to digital platforms, shackled to digital networks. This should be the illustration, no? Which take over everything and take hold of everything: information, management, relationships, food, health, education. It is like the digital corporations are saying to us, if you are not into digital platforms, you don't exist. You won't get medical help or economical help or education, etc. The privatization of the atmosphere in our countries reached unprecedented levels during the pandemic, at a point where community communications or indigenous radios are being swept away before the dominance of private internet services. The platforms promote the ideology that automation is softening the world, making our lives easier and putting us in the comfort of our home, when the costs in human labor and environmental destruction are brutal. And we still need to discuss the de-skilling of peoples, due to all this internet everything. The large corporations acquired their legitimacy because their activities in our countries were classified as essential. Mining companies, greenhouses, industrial factory farms, slaughterhouses and meat processing plants, processed food plants and distribution centers. We saw free pass to imports of all kinds of pesticides, free circulation of agrotoxics, fast-tracking approvals of new transgenic crops, in contrast to zero support to family agriculture, agroecology, or local supply chains. Essential activity became equivalent to contagion activity. The owners, the employers, are claiming that they are not accountable for providing protection to their workers because they will lose money, of course. Neither should they be punished for firing them if needed. And employers did common cause in many countries in Latin America, shielded in the constitutional state of emergency declared everywhere. Military and police were given more power. Vital services handed over to platforms. Labor rights violations allowed. And maybe this is very common everywhere, but what I want to stress is that all this became legal. All sorts of legal reforms took place because of the state of emergency. This is something really specific to what has happened during the pandemic in Latin America, no? All the atrocities that I am describing are legal. All the weight is given to techno-solutionism. Here comes this one, no? While at the same time, there is a process of dismantling ways of life and disabling strategies, knowledge and techniques, but above all, the imaginative and creative capacities to solve by ourselves what matters most to us. When all our devices respond to automated and even programmable remote controls, we will have lost control of our lives. Our resistance. In this standardized and normalized world, there are still gaps. Otherwise, we could not even imagine a way out, no? Or being discussing this here. We acknowledge that the emergency is, of course, real. So we act. And despite tons of creative efforts done by urban and rural collectives, organizations, and individuals, the authorities haven't supported or attempted a synergy with those efforts. We saw peasants carrying bags with produce to donate to nearby cities in Ecuador. We saw food packages left in empty roads for the poorest to take freely in Brazil. Youngsters in bicycles helping to distribute masks and medicines in El Salvador. Efficient sanitary filters in indigenous communities in Mexico. Collective quarantine homes for the returning migrants in several of our borders. About some of the strategies developed in
Lost sound from Veronica?
Yeah, yes, I saw that I was being reconnected. I am back on again. Am I back on again?
Yes, go.
Yeah, I'm about to finish. I will just repeat a little bit. Okay, I was...
Go ahead, please, and complete your presentation.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I was, sorry, we lost the connection for a second. I was describing that about all these very creative ways of facing the disaster in difficult places in the region. Someone said the traditions and the traditional is being adjusted or is being adapted to the exceptional, no? The survival of a critical eye tells us that the match is not total. Imagination and knowledge, alternative ways of life are possible, and they are what we have to exercise from outside the world that has been blown up by digital waves. We refuse to see the pandemic as a medical problem. This, I think, is a very, very important reflection from our dialogues. It is a system failure, to say the least, a crisis of crises. Our answers to the pandemic are being built collectively with facts more than discourses at this point. We see new interactions between the rural and the urban, the producers and the consumers, so to call them, no? Even if the blurring of these frontiers is only incipient. Equally urgent, we see the need to challenge the role of science and technology that come from power centers. We can't just surrender to the medical solutions while the deep causes of the pandemic are hardly addressed in the institutional narratives. We challenge the ongoing building of new infrastructures, huge ducts, dams, mining exploitations, and more private transportation, as those structures didn't prove to be efficient during the quarantines. The communication structures, the connectivity that we have been imposed is good for profit, not for community survival. Until the key conditions that allow communities to thrive back in the hands, are back in the hands of the people, we don't see a solution to this and the next pandemics, as some of the root causes aren't tackled yet, like the destruction of nature by agroindustry, privatization of vital services, and the dominion of technoscience to analyze problems and intervene life. So this illustration, I'm finishing, this illustration tries to describe the way that we want to recuperate public spaces, no? Building a hall for collective meetings to have assemblies. We see assemblies and discussions as a very important tool to overcome this crisis. This is a very concrete proposal coming from one of the dialogues. Agricultural workers have a lot to say about the future. Not only that we need to protect their rights, Would they know so much about the food production in a damaged planet? And they know the inside of the beast, they know the structures, they know the connections, they know the massivity of the production. No? They are strong, they speak so many languages, etc. So this is a very concrete proposal. And human cities, no? Human public spaces, not the real of the automobile, not the real of the malls and processed foods. And we think that technology and tools are should not be only thought as of objects, but processes and relationships and spaces and diversity of times. And this is all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronica. We're having a little bit of issues with the connection, but I hope you can hear me now. I got to learn later that most of what I said at the beginning was not being heard. So I'm going to post a few points of what I said in the chat box, just to so that participants can have a bit of information about what I was saying. But thank you so much for your presentation. We're going to see that these conversations are really very interesting and they are bringing up very important points about the technology, about the pandemic, about responses, and all that is going on. But we're going to, it looks like we're not doing too badly with time, but I'm going to hand it over to Mfoni, so before we now come back, respond to questions and comments that will come on. And while Mfoni is speaking, I'll post my introductory comments just for people to see some of the things I was talking about. Mfoni Antia is my colleague at Health of Mother Foundation in Nigeria. She's an environmental scientist and environmental psychology, and currently studying for our desk on. She also doubles as the desk officer on African technology assessment platform Afritab, a network which she will talk a bit more about as I turn it over now to Mfoni. So please go ahead, Mfoni.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. I'm not sure. I think my video has been disabled from the secretariat, I guess. But it's okay since my face was seen already. So it's evening in my location. So good evening and welcome. So Veronica has spoken a bit detailed about what they're doing out there in, would I say, Retekla and ETC in regards of technology assessment platform. My task is a bit simple. To introduce the baby tab. I call it the baby tab because it just began just this September. So, okay, hold on, I'm about to start my video now. So I call Afritab the baby tab because it just begun to. Can everyone see my slide? So to help us well. Okay. I'm trying to use the. Okay, so I'll just talk on the direction of who is Afritab, where is it from, why Afritab, the goals we have, and where we are and where we are headed. That will just summarize what I want to talk about this evening. So Afritab is Africa Technology Assessment Platform. The platform was established as a response to the negative impact of accelerating high technologies in Africa, which we all know is upturning livelihoods and right across the continent and transforming landscape for action on agriculture, our health system, conservation, climate, and etc. So where is Afritab from? I decided to address Afritab as a person. I don't know if that's okay by everyone. So Afritab was vetted after 2 long years of research work in Africa by ETC and some other groups, and a continent-wide School of Ecology on impact of emerging technologies in Africa. which was co-hosted in Nigeria in October 2019 by HOMEF and ETC Group. The picture on my left here is a part of a session of the people that attended that event in October 2019. Afritab is a part of a bigger technology assessment platform, which is International TAP, International Technology Assessment Platform. You see the logo of, I was trying to merge all the logos together, forgive my poor work. There's the big logo here is the one for InterTAPs, and then you see Afritab logo, Red Tecla, and then Asia Pacific. So why Afritab? The platform is created to assess implications of new and emerging technologies, as we all know, as I mentioned earlier, which is impacting on our food system, our agriculture, climate, and the traditions in Africa and cultures, and also created to create a counter-narrative on the new and subtle wave of colonization and what we usually call coloniality in HOMEF. Coloniality would be a mindset that still depicts a bit of a slavery. Yeah, on the books, it seems that colonization is gone, but there's still this mindset in Africa that we need everything we need, that it's good, it's coming from the global north. So it is that mindset and narrative that Afritab is set to counter, to create a counter narratives on the new and subtle wave of colonization and coloniality set in motion in Africa by profit-driven tech corporations. A lot of the proponents of these technologies are profit-driven. Most of them do not care about what impacts these technologies have on Africa and the African people. So Afritab goals, we have two major goals. One is to engage with and support African CSOs and movements who are working to understand issues around new and emerging technologies and concentration. And two is to catalyze action and broader shifts in African-related narratives and policies on emerging technologies towards precaution, consent, justice, and sovereignty. And these goals we plan to achieve through several activities, but out of that I have maybe 5 of them listed here. One is the mapping of stakeholders and legal instruments, which is currently ongoing, undertaking research, analysis, and horizon scanning on new and emerging technologies in Africa. That also is ongoing. We plan to create publications and popular materials about specific technologies, which we want to share with other CSOs as learning materials and advocacy materials as well. We plan to create and grow a strong Pan-African Afritab network, prioritizing the creation of strong collaborations in Lusophone, North Africa, Southern and Eastern Africa. This is more or less like a bit of a long-term activity, because currently we have 2 decks. I'm going to talk about those 2 decks. And we plan to organize a series of in-person or virtual conversations in Africa about food system and technology under the project Which Way Forward, which Nemo will be talking about as he summarizes this section today. So where we are, the diversity of languages in Africa. Initially, there was a plan to establish 1 desk for Afritab, but we noticed, realized that there will be challenges and hindrances because of the diversity of languages in Africa. And this necessitated the creation of, for a start, 2 desks, the Anglophone and the Francophone desks. The Anglophone desk is called Africa Technology Assessment Platform, which is hosted in Nigeria by HOMEF. And the Francophone desk is Pemta Afrique. I'm sorry, I'm not able to pronounce, I'm still learning French, the word. So it's hosted in Mali by IPAD Afrique. So far, what we have done and where we are, like I mentioned earlier, we have started the horizon scanning and stakeholders mapping. And we have kickstarted a series of conversations on impact of COVID-19 and technologies on our food system. This is Which Way Forward, as I had mentioned earlier, and I think Nemo will speak more about that. We plan to have each of the decks, the Anglophone and the Francophone decks, are hosted for just 1 series, 1 episode of these conversations, and we are planning subsequent series of the conversations, and this will have participants explore a range of possible futures post-COVID-19, with prayer that the COVID-19 will soon be over, and then we'll have a post-COVID-19 era, including the role of technologies, corporations, and agro-ecosystem in shaping those futures. So that's one of the things we are a futuristic plan. And then where are we headed? The target of the platform is to see continents, the African continent, where tech and tech solutions will be created by Africans, majorly, with indigenous people and African landscape and peculiarities in mind. This is because some of the technologies that are created and shipped to Africa do not have our peculiarities in mind. You see, take for instance, the genetic GMOs and the products sent to Africa. And you hear people saying that if they do labeling for this product, that it's going to help people make a choice on whether or not they want to take the product. But it's not so in Africa, because some of our food products, take for instance, there's what we call moi moi and akara, which are made from beans. And these products are just produced locally by the roadsides. People who want to eat them, local producers and vendors will not be able to write by the roadside that, okay, these beans or the cowpea used here were produced from genetic modification. So the idea of labeling might not really work in Africa. So while producing or making technologies, we need a situation where people will have, or producers will have, peculiarities of Africa in mind, so that to meet our need as it is, and not just translate what is in other countries and force us to take it down our throats. Where we are headed also, we also hope to see a continent devoid of new wave of colonization and coloniality, as I mentioned before. We plan to create, this I have mentioned before, and grow a strong Pan-African Afritab network. I think I'm coming to the end of my presentation. So Afritab is open, like I called it before, it's a baby network, and we are open to collaborations and linkages as we plan to create or to launch into the future, kind of future that we want, to create a pathway to the kind of future that we want, a future that is good for everyone, a future that has grassroots people in mind, a future that the gap between the rich and the poor will be reduced, a future that has everyone in mind and carries everyone along. We are asking that everyone joins us, and as we push this goal forward. So we are open to collaborations with organizations with similar goals. And Afritab is on Twitter as Afri_tab. So do follow us and spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fonny. So thank you for your presentation. I'm sure the questions will be coming. I actually personally was hoping to hear more from you regarding the conversation that Afritab held sometime in December. So maybe you could say a bit more about the outcome of that Afritab, that conversation, and then we'll take the questions. Can you do that in 2 minutes?
Yes, I can. Okay, so as part of the things, the first stage of the conversation was for us to experience sharing about the pandemic, where we got information from impact of the pandemic on relationship with food and food access, and how technology was more or less useful during the pandemic. And the outputs were, so a lot of people, they were similar across the African countries that were represented. Participants mentioned that jobs were halted, which led to anxiety, fear of lockdown, loss of livelihood, insomnia, and later protests, as the case in Nigeria, and riots, which led to violence and looting of private businesses, as was found in Nigeria. And the government also had lots of inconsistencies in the announcements, as such people had little trust for them. And then this led also to government borrowing funds. And these funds that have been borrowed in some countries, or in most countries, are not really used for or sent down to the grassroots to help the people that are really in need. So it's more or less another cycle of colonization. We borrow and we keep the government or the people at the top echelon use the money, and it's a cycle of slavery. And then, okay, the pandemic also, as was reported, said like a litmus test on the populations. This was because from assessing the impacts, the division between the protected cities and sacred zones and sacrificial zones could be seen. You notice the wide gap between those who can sacrifice, and people in the sacrifice zones would be the farmers, the healthcare workers, the low-income earners, and immigrants, while the people in the protected area are the minority which were kept away and protected. Some countries or regions witness a high death rate among those in the sacrifice zones. This also has been viewed as a political strategy rather than a solution. It was also drawn from the conversation that health officials were trusted more for information and maybe some from government officials, and international government officials, much more than news outlets and social media, because social media was circulating a lot of fake news. Food accessibility and availability reduced during the lockdown. Food prices skyrocketed. In fact, in Nigeria, for example, onions was a very, very scarce commodity and very costly. People were forced to accept and eat available rather than preferred foods. And lockdown also, like Nemo mentioned, created a sense of disconnection from people. Farmers recorded great loss of perishable goods due to lack of transportation from farm to market and to consumers. Technology, but for this lockdown, technology helps in a way. For instance, Zoom, Google Meet, and WhatsApp was useful because a lot of organizations had to translate to the virtual space to hold their meetings and have the activities. So that part was a useful part for technology. Apps like Zoom, because now where we had challenges for the technology was when almost everybody started using, there was pressure on the technologies, and then the apps started misbehaving and shutting down. And it was also drawn from the meeting that farmers, especially the local farmers, were the worst hit. This was there was minimal communication to them and no assistance on how to preserve perishable farm produce or compensation to the affected farmers. This later affected consumers, as we saw with the prices of food in African countries. So this was what we drew from the conversations we had in December. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fonny. So we have some questions coming in. And Veronica, I hope you are still there. The questions I'm seeing are both in English and Spanish. The first question says, the one I'm seeing, I'm going to read it now. So this is open to both of you. It says, as cows are herd animals, they prefer to be with other cows, not people. Given this, what are the speaker's views on robotic milking machines? I feel that they have a place, especially where you can allow the cows to express more natural behavior, and the robot could milk the cow 6 times per day, replicating the calf. It also analyzes the milk there by identifying health issues earlier. Now, what is your responses to that question and comment and question? Robots milking cows. Can they milk cows like humans?
Well, I don't know if Veronica is still there, but if I may respond to that. Personally, our concerns in Africa for technology has not always been whether or not it is, it does job better than humans, but the concern is on precaution. What will happen when, for instance, as you watch in funny movies, when robots decide to harm, if they can milk cow, I think they can kill cows too. What if robots decide in the field that they want to just misbehave or malfunction from wherever their brain is, so to say, and then decide to jump into that? Then another point would be like, if we allow robots to milk cows, where will we have the restriction? Would there be restriction on what robots can do? Who is going to stop people from marrying robots, take for instance, and robots from doing every other thing? It's just a bit of subtle thing that you have robots do something that look seemingly insignificant or important, and then that open way for people to have robots do almost everything. So how do we cope when we allow the robotic engineering and the robots proponents to take over the market and decide that robots will do everything? What will happen then? That's just my comment or my response.
Okay.
I am here I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we're hearing you.
Ok, voy a contestar en español. Esta es una pregunta muy importante para... ahí pongo el video, listo. Esta es... Sí, lo acabo de hacer ahora. Estoy en el canal de español. ¿Listo? Sí, aquí ha habido en América Latina bastante discusión.
In Latin America, we also held an important discussion in the last couple of months. We may say during the last couple of years, we have been talking about the so-called agriculture 4.0, the new generation of agriculture, which is presented to us as something that it's going to work from the beginning. That's something that's going to be naturally better to the system that we already have. We are used to thinking that technological innovation is only here to make an improvement and to make our lives better. With our advocacy network, TECLA, and with the ETC group, we have done some analysis to study how this agriculture 4.0 is applied locally and to see what impacts it has. We have found the following. We've seen that in the Latin America region, there is a very high degree of corruption when it comes to the redistribution of wealth, when it comes to resolving some institutional issues, when it comes to the selling of land. We have seen that an endemic problem in the Latin American region is the high degree of corruption coming from the public institutions, coming from the bad functioning of the states and nations. Another problem that relates to the previous problem is the production of drugs. Especially in the Mexico region, this is an important problem. This kind of production is a threat to many local communities. Now, a third problem that's maybe independent from the previous two, our geographical area is very special from the seismic point of view. Now, if you were to take the ideal presentation of agriculture 4.0 and compare it to the realities in Latin America, you will see that there is a gap and that we will only benefit from the crumbs of the innovation. In some regions in Latin America, the big innovation was the takeover of mobile phones. Virtually almost everybody in our continent has online connectivity, but there is a very big gap to bridge between this universal connectivity to reach the reality of agriculture 4.0. On another level, we also have to consider the relationships of people to their climate, to their land. We also have to consider the millenary knowledge and culture that it's passed on. And technology cannot bridge this gap. A robot cannot be programmed to face the geographical problems, to face the culture, and to face the societal dimension of terrain and land. Therefore, we think that agriculture 4.0 is a very distant reality, and more often than not is a not desirable scenario for most of the regions in Latin America.
Okay, thank you so much, Veronica, for that answer. There are two more questions in the chat box. Let me go to the last one. It's because this one is for both of you. It says, I feel that Africa and other nations, I feel that Africa and other nations where more people are involved in traditional production are in a much stronger position to resist inappropriate technologies. What are your thoughts on that? This question comes to both Fonisa and Veronica. So in Africa and other regions that still have more people involved in traditional production are in a stronger position to resist inappropriate technologies. Do you agree with that?
Okay, maybe I will take that. I agree that the grassroots have the power that if their voices are amplified and that they can stand together to resist operations and, as the person mentioned, inappropriate technologies. But at the moment, as it is the case in Nigeria, these people are not so much aware of the impact of technologies or the new and emerging technology. So they need to be told, there's need to create awareness, and there's need to expose them to understanding what it is that they are signing up for, because there's this flair for people, again, I'm going to cite Nigeria, for people to accept things from the global north, because, I mean, it looks good. So there's that flair to accept technology. So if they're not exposed to understanding what the implications are, they will not be able to speak up. And again, we need to be able to build solidarity and bring them together. So if this happens, yes, I agree, they have a better chance of resisting inappropriate technologies.
And before Veronica comes in, just to add that from my experience also, we find that wherever farmers and those involved in local production using traditional methods, whenever they get to know about the threats from these technologies, they're totally opposed to them. So just as Vonso said, our work is to bring these people, to bring the farmers together, the local producers together, and we're sure we can build a very strong momentum against inappropriate technologies. So thank you for that response. Now, Veronica, what do you have to say to that?
Bueno, la pregunta está relacionada con la producción tradicional.
This question relates to the traditional forms of production. From what we've seen in Latin America, traditional production is not something that takes place in isolation. Traditional production is possible because there is a collective discussion and there is a collective management of the means of production. We have a discussion taking place. We host our own assemblies. We have our own community governments, although they work in parallel to the formal politics in the respective countries. We hold discussions on the future of people pertaining to these communities. To me, the places where there is a traditional production taking place is a place where a discussion is being held. And I think because of this discussion that takes place in parallel to the traditional production, these people are well equipped to resist technologies. In Mexico, we have many forms of traditional production, and we have many forms of collective governments, informal governments, if you want to call it that way. The management of land in these communities is collective. Therefore, people are not removed from their means of production. People are owners of their means of production, and they can do a very objective evaluation of the value added by technology. As soon as they think that technology will destroy and distort the social connections with the land, then they will reject it. These assemblies, for instance, hold discussions about whether children will have access to content that's not supposed to be for children. They also hold discussions about whether the internet is going to serve their communication, if it's going to improve their communication to other families or to migrant families. They evaluate and assess the added value by technology. If it's not an added value, they'll reject it.
All right, thank you so much. There's another question asking about Afritabs. The question says, could you share a few examples of technologies/platforms examined by Afritab so far, either created elsewhere and exported in Africa, or more locally suited technologies? I believe both Foniso and Veronica can weigh in on this, but Foniso, take the first step. I'm sorry to use that word.
It's okay, Chloe. I don't know if you were here when I started. I mentioned that Afritab is a baby tab. So by that I meant that the index was established in September. So far, what we are doing is we're scanning the horizon for what technologies are available or emerging technologies in Africa, and then we are also scanning for stakeholders. So for Afritab, we have not yet accessed any technology yet. I'm sure maybe Veronica and people from other tabs have something to say.
Right, Veronica, you have the floor. The question is if you could share examples of a few examples of technologies or platforms that you've examined so far.
Bueno, por ejemplo, en la red Tecla hemos estado.
Yes, of course. In the Tecla network in Latin America, we tried to find common ground when it comes to technology innovations. We wanted to see what technologies can become an improvement by means of further automation or other advancements. As Foniso was saying, we are taking a decolonizing approach because the approach is still to colonize the lives of people. In our advocacy network, we have tried to understand what they mean by the digital era. We have also focused on understanding trying to understand social networks and seeing how they take over and how sometimes they instill communication problems. I don't know if I am answering the question directly. We are trying to understand what will be the implications of the 5G networks in our region. We are being told that some infrastructure needs to be put in place. We are going to have this electrical infrastructure everywhere. And we're trying to understand what will be the impact of electromagnetic radiation for indigenous communities. We're trying to understand what are the impacts in those local communities where these infrastructures have already been put in place. Am I answering the question? As I was saying, we're trying to understand what it means to have a digital era or to be in a digital era. We're trying to translate all of these technology innovations to people in an accessible kind of language. We're trying to explain to them what is the blockchain, what is the so-called 5G.
And this is where we're going to show. So unfortunately, we have to close it here. Thank you so much for your contribution, Veronica and Foniso.
Okay.
If I may, I wanted to close the conversation by saying something.
Conversation really from the grassroots.
I just wanted to say that the takeover technology is already to be seen in our region.
Oh. Okay, thank you so much. I'm sorry, I was speaking over what you were saying. I was just thanking Veronica and Foniso for excellent presentations, for your responses to the questions. It's very clear that the risky technologies that are being introduced for one reason or the other are best resisted by the grassroots. And I thank you so much for leading this conversation. And I thank the ETC group for promoting this panel. And thanks, this is the real way to talk about real farming. I thank the Oxford Real Farming Conference for putting this together. Thank you so much and goodbye.